This evening, we are going to be talking about Prodigal Son, and we're very, very glad tonight to have Joanne Ferdinick and Jack Meeks here with us. And typical of couples, they're sitting on opposite sides of the table. So. Brenda and Bill, you break the mold when it comes to that. So, but we are turning this presentation over to Jack for this evening with our grateful appreciation.
All right. Well, Claude, I know at one time you were a Presbyterian, so you should be able to open us in prayer tonight. Presbyterians, at least elders, are supposed to always have a prayer handy.
Oh, well, it's been a long time. I can say a few words though. Let us pray. Dear God, we appreciate being able to meet together this evening to study your word and to profit by what it has to say to us. May you open our eyes and ears to the knowledge that we're about to get and find ways where we can implement what we learn. Amen.
Amen. Well, I thought we'd start off. I see Pixie Ann has her Bible handy.
No, I stole it.
Yeah.
I have to put it back when I.
And so it'd probably be a good thing to read the passage. And one of the things I picked up in a few minutes, I'll talk about some of the books that I've looked at and some of the ones you may or may not have looked at. But one thing I found out I didn't know until looking at this book, Short Stories by Jesus, is that this parable is only in the book of Luke. And there are three sort of lost, those who've been here before, you've got the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the prodigal son, all in Luke, with a very different introduction than what's in Matthew. Matthew only has the lost sheep. So I don't know how many of you have seen the Message Bible. Is that something?
Yeah.
Seen it.
Oh, by the way, that was written by a Presbyterian, just so you know. So let me read this introduction that again goes to the lost sheep, which is considerably different introduction than what we're going to hear in the book of Luke. And I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll read enough of it for you to get a flavor of it. It says, at about the same time, the disciples came to Jesus asking, who gets the highest rank in God's kingdom? And then Jesus talks about coming to the kingdom as a child comes to the kingdom. And he goes on to say at the last part of this section, watch that you don't treat a single one of these childlike believers arrogantly. You realize, don't you, that their personal angels are constantly in touch with my Father in heaven. And then he continues, look at it this way. And then he talks about the 100 sheep and the loss of one sheep. Well, it's considerably different introduction in Luke. So I'm going to read this. This is from the Jewish Annotated New Testament, but it's the NRSV. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and scribes were grumbling and saying, this fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable. And then he goes into the sheep and the coin, and then gets to our prodigal son. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place, talked about the salmon color. A severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father, but while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when the son of yours came back, who had devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Then the father said to him, son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. So having heard that very familiar parable, and I think I read a parable as a short story with sort of a punch to it, with and lots of different meanings depending on what we happen to see. But going over to this picture, I don't obscure it.
Probably if you go to the other side of it, that would be a little bit better, if that's okay for you.
So
There you go.
you can see this well enough. Got the father and the son who's come back, and then over at the edge is the older brother. So when you see that, and some of you may have read this book, I should have all my props with me. Some of you may have read this book, The Prodigal Son. Anyway, what do you know about this picture, and what does it tell you maybe more about this particular parable?
Thank
you.
Compared to the others in the image, the son, very shoddily dressed, barefoot, it looks like. Just doesn't look like he fits with this group of people the way he appears right now.
It looks like he's had a hard time.
Mm-hmm. The father is glowing. He's so happy. The brother is in disdain. He's very, and that's the contrast that I'm seeing from this visual, from this look.
What else do you see?
The younger man is close to the father, and the older one is standing apart, but he's on his knees.
One of the things that was pointed out to me, and I don't remember if it was in the Prodigal Son, is that of the two hands, if you look at the painting closely, one is a feminine hand and the other is a masculine hand. If you look at the painting closely, representing everything.
I got that in the book. I hadn't noticed that until I read it, but yes.
I can't see it that well. Whose hands? Are they?
Fathers.
father.
Oh, oh,
You have to look at it, and like I say, I never noticed it until I read it in the book. Who wrote the book? I can't remember. I'm blank right now.
Oh, Henry Noah, now.
Yeah, because he's written a number of books.
Are
But
the
I
younger
remember,
people servants?
well, I think, what was
They're
it
not
point out
richly
in the book,
dressed.
the people that you don't see as clearly as the,
Well, the
One a
book,
woman?
Yes, I think the seated one is probably the one.
yeah.
I just remember it myself that I'd be mad as hell, you know, that
Me
didn't give
too.
me nothing, and I've been, like he says, working my head off here, and then here comes this yo-yo after you spin everything.
Why would the father do what he did? Go against tradition, give the younger son his share before he died.
That's a good question. What do you think?
Well, he was generous enough to figure if that's what he wants on to him, you know. Hoping that he wouldn't spend it the way he spent it.
Was he really that much of a favorite? That he would do that?
He divided he gave to each half of what, he divided it equally, I think,
Yeah,
But
between
by
the older
tradition,
son and the younger son.
by tradition, would it not all, everything he owned passed to the eldest
Yeah.
son?
right.
The son, the eldest son, now the lord
Mhm.
of the manor, whatever, to
Take care.
just take care of the younger son.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the, this, this book is written by Amy Jill Levine,
oh,
who's,
Jewish.
Jewish.
Yeah.
And so she gives some different perspectives on some of this. And I wonder, now this is my coming from my CPA background. I don't think it says in there that the younger son got half. And I really wonder, well, did you really get half? And I wonder, well, how did they decide how to, did they have to sell stuff to split it up? You know, I mean, I think those are probably kind of ancillary questions.
Yeah, they just say divided.
Yeah,
They don't say, yeah.
Did the Jewish annotations comment on that, Jack, the tradition versus the story?
well, the sense I got out of the book is that this action wouldn't be unheard of.
Okay.
Probably not common, but maybe not unheard of.
It seems as though the prodigal son knew that there was something coming his way. He went to his father and said, give me what is mine. That's
Instead, so he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had. And squandered. So evidently, at this time in their lives, the oldest son didn't get everything and have to take care of the rest of the family. But maybe that they got shares, it's just the older son would have gotten a greater share in the property or something.
And like the story of the workman in the vineyard, the owner said, it's mine to do what I want,
Yeah,
Mhm.
isn't it? And so while the father lives, it's all his. He can do what he wants with it. He can distribute it any way he wants. But you can still see why the older son was ticked.
it says, give me the share of property that will belong to me. So evidently, at some point in time, they knew how much each was gonna get. It might not necessarily have been half the property. I mean, there may be three other brothers for all we know, you know.
He was looking to an anticipatory share. He was anticipating. Well, one of the things for a variety of reasons, I've been thinking about a lot lately, and this played into, as I was reading the part of this book about our parable tonight, that for 30 years or so out of my not quite 50-year CPA career, I've been an expert witness in financial disputes. And this was real logical. When I started doing that, I found out to be recognized as an expert, someone had to have the appropriate experience, education, training, experience in the field in question to be recognized by the court as an expert witness. And what I've come to think about more over the years is that all of us filter what comes to us through our own education, training, experience. And we're all informed by and limited by that. And I was thinking about that a good bit as I read what the lady who wrote that particular book had to say, because she's Jewish and she's obviously studied, she's got a PhD in all sorts of books that she's written. And well, I don't have a PhD in anything. I don't know whether what they call a completed Jew or whether she's become a Christian or not, but she's certainly super knowledgeable. There's no
Or
question
she's
about
still
that.
Jewish, I think.
We can be Jewish and still a Christian. Any rate, as I read through what she had to say, I thought about that, filtering what was coming through us through our own education, training, experience. And I hadn't realized, as I mentioned, until I saw this book, that there's a considerably different introduction to the one parable of the lost sheep, and then all three of these, Matthew versus Luke. And so she goes into great lengths about not having the Pharisees pointed out as the bad guys, as Luke does, because Luke positions these three parables as answering the Pharisees' concerns about the people Jesus was hanging out to. So she talks a lot about that, and it almost seemed at some level she was talking more about what the parable didn't mean or how we shouldn't look at it. And since I've been laughing about Presbyterians since I still am one, she took a number of exceptions to various things that Presbyterian pastors had said, but she thought they were too harsh. And at any rate, it's worth looking at, I think, but she does bring out, and interestingly enough, I don't know how many of you have seen this. She's one of the editors of this Jewish annotated New Testament. And so, among other things, she writes an introduction to the book of Luke. And she brings out the contradictions and complications of how the Pharisees are viewed in what we call the New Testament, and in Luke as well, because some of them sometimes they're viewed positively, but clearly in this introduction, they're not. And then in Paul's letters, in describing, I forgot which one it is, when describing his own capabilities and attributes and that type of thing, he talks about being a Pharisee and who he studied under and all that. So it's I'm wondering, thinking about those two introductions, how does that perhaps change our look at how we see this parable, just as with the introduction being different? The parable's not in Matthew, but one of the other lost parables is.
The father could not have been a Pharisee. A Pharisee is a stickler for the law. He would have told the son, well, you can wait. No. And then we would have no story. And there is, of course, wisdom in that. Maybe the younger son was too young to have that much money.
Based on what he did, it would seem so.
He should have stuck around and done what he was supposed to do.
He just turned 18.
I read a book called The Birth Order Book, which talks about how the first child is usually the responsible one. Abe Lincoln, these people become presidents and heads of corporations, and or they completely revolt. It was written by a psychologist. He wrote one called about the only child, but then there are some uncanny predictions that can, in somewhat general terms, that can be made about the various children and the order they were born in. And if the second child is at least 5 years younger than the firstborn, he can behave as the firstborn, but not, you know, they're usually very different from the responsible one. And that's borne out in this particular parable. I
Well,
realize that I'm not sure that the psychologist who wrote the birth order book was that familiar with this parable, but he might have been. I can't remember all the details. It's been a long time since I read it. I am a firstborn. My brother is 6 years younger than me, so he's a firstborn too. And my two sisters are kind of fulfilling within general ranges the prophecy that the psychiatrist.
Interesting.
Well, and in this book I keep going back to by Miss Levine, she talks a good bit about that. And so again, I thought maybe she got a little bit astray with all those elements, because ultimately it would seem these stories, these parables, are calling us to a change of attitude and change of action. And I thought about what this has amused me over all these years. This probably goes back 30 years ago when I used to watch TV. Joanne and I hardly ever watch any TV. And so one Saturday morning, I happened to be watching TV, and there was this program on there, and it was about Singapore. And apparently they were having issues with not having enough children born. And as hard as this is to believe, it appeared that some of the people who were getting married didn't understand exactly how that process worked. And so they were encouraged, I guess they were providing a little education. And they were also, I remember they had a picture of a mom and dad and a boy and a girl playing on the beach, you know, with their shovel and their, you know, their everything in the bucket and having a great time. And they had this jingle, you know, families are fun. Families are fun. Families are fun. Well, not. And so, well, not always.
We've seen that. Never one of our family members is particularly dysfunctional.
So Jack, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but this parable has always irked me a little bit because I identify with the older brother. Now I'd be curious, is there anybody in this group who does not identify with the older brother? I mean, we're all older brothers. We've been at it. None of us took our share and left and went to Bali and had a great, I mean, we're all in the older brother's shoes, I think.
With some hesitancy after what Brenda has just said, I'm the second child, 14 months younger than my oldest brother, who's quite successful. No, I never did, you know, I was not offered any treasure to take away. And in fact, Christine, the part that I don't struggle with this, it doesn't bother me, but I've never identified with, I'm not worthy to be called your son, treat me like one of the hired hands. My parents always treated all of us like the hired hands. So there was not a caste system in our household.
Well, I'm the second oldest by a number of years, so I qualify as an oldest. With a mom always liked you best younger sister. And I tell you what, if she went out and spent a chunk of the family fortune, would I be pissed off? I would never get over it. So somebody give me some words for the older brother, because I'm thinking I'm the older brother.
Well, one of the things, and she had brought up the sibling situation when I was working on my master's, we had a whole week's workshop on families and orders of families. If you were an only child, this, and this. If you were one of two, then there was this situation we have right here. And then if you were more than or whatever, if there was a 7-year difference, you would have another number one because the first one was 7 years away from, it's like my brother was adopted and I was in the first grade. So they brought him home and I can remember when he began first grade, that my dad was explaining to him, now, if anybody says anything to you, you just tell them that we got to pick out the most wonderful boy in the whole world. And you are da, 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 da. And of course, I was standing there and I was 12 and I thought, what about me? You got stuck. Me. Yeah. And the thing was, is that because Landon was grade 7, 12, and you went to Arlington Elementary. So I was there when we got him. And then when he got to Arlington Elementary, I was at Landon. Then when he got to Terry Parker, I was at university. So I never even knew him in a sense, you know. And then he died at an early age. But I can remember that, business, you know, and number one. But also, I'll tell you, when I grew up, if the first child was a girl, oh my, because they wanted the first person was to be a boy to handle, you know, whatever. And then a girl, and then you had to deal with that. And no, I totally understand. Like I say, I'd be mad as hell if I were.
But the question is, and I get in these days, there was inherited wealth was the norm. And so what is taken away from the family pie, it, you know, reduces the size of the pie. But it seems oftentimes the younger child takes whatever and goes and makes his own way. So what I'm just reflecting on as we're talking about this is perhaps the younger son had an allotment that did belong to him, and that he would have thought, I mean, that one would have thought he would have taken and acted responsibility to build his own family, while the older son was sort of relegated to being part of this, you know, group and having to continue in the family business without choice. And so perhaps, and I don't know, this is a new thought, perhaps what the younger son took wouldn't have been part of the older brother's estate anyway. But it's just a piss off thing to have the kid come back and be welcomed back.
Well, let's go to that, because going back to this call for a change of attitude and a change of action, one of the things that's common in all three of these parables, and there are other parables too, and perhaps it's even fundamental to the whole notion of good news, is celebration. In all three of these parables, you know, what's lost is found, there's celebration. And I was thinking, I didn't go try to look this up, but there are some other parables Jesus tells where people are asked to come to celebrate and they don't. You know, the one, the king's going to give a feast. I haven't looked that up to see exactly what it says or where it is. And people have all these bogus excuses and they don't come to the celebration. Or I was thinking the one where someone's getting married and some of the foolish virgins, I think they're called. Yeah, they're not ready. They're not ready to celebrate. So how does that play out in terms of us thinking about living into this good news as an act of celebration, whether we're Presbyterians or Episcopalians, some of the more, I guess, serious denominations?
We don't know what happened next. Is this just a party because he's back, and then what? Does he become a servant? Does he assume the role he always had? He certainly doesn't have the property he would have inherited. It's gone.
He squandered his money.
So I think the lack of property is an important aspect, because if the younger son didn't have a share of the property, he had like some of the what it sounds like, because he went off and spent it all. So he was got a share of the wealth that the property produced, but it's the farm, the property, that is what produces the wealth. And so the oldest son still had the source of generating more wealth, and the younger son, because you can't split up farms, there's economies of scale unless you have a very large farm. And that's why, I forget the word for it, but where the oldest son is the one who gets the property, is because you can't break up the property or no one will be able to survive because the farm is too small. So anyway, it just seems like they're that the older, and it just looks to be like the older son was still the one who was very much favored because he's the one who's inheriting the land. And so I don't know, you could argue that that in that case, it's definitely not an equal share that the younger son had, and that, his coming back to the fold, certainly something to celebrate, but it's not like he can become equal to his brother. I don't know. I'm less sympathetic to the older brother because I feel like he's still very much the advantaged sibling. And
You're
he
getting
could
some
have to be
sympathy.
a little bit more gracious about, I mean, if we trust that really the younger son is contrite, and that's, I think, up for grabs, whether he really is or whether he's just more manipulating. But
Miss Levine went down on the side of manipulating, but I think we can all
Yeah.
have opinions about that.
yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. So
Jay, it's dad's attention that's the issue here.
Yeah.
Not whether or not, or for me anyway, it's not whether or not who got more of the money, the farm or the stuff. We're kids and we want dad's attention. And here's this bird brain who goes off and spends it, and dad appears to be glad to see him. That's hard
Yeah.
for an older son. In as a middle daughter, I can say that's hard for the middle
Yeah.
child.
No, I understand that, but I even wonder whether the father gave him his inheritance early because he knew it was the only way that he would ever grow into understanding the value of hard work and so on. That if he just, and so the father is very happy because this was actually what he had thought would happen and the end result that he thought would happen.
Do you think that the younger son is on the right path? I think he's going to go off and do this again.
I don't think he'll have an opportunity to do it again. That's the thing. He'll have to live with it. That he's, that opportunity is over. I don't know. I'm just more sympathetic to the father.
The fact that he was willing to come back and work as a hired hand shows a certain contrition and maybe an effort to get back in his father's good graces. Maybe
Oh, you
realize
stop these.
maybe realizing
I
that
have to confess, I'm the third child. So
It isn't though, I mean, if this is a story, these aren't real people. I mean, they're described within a context of the culture. It's a story, and it's a story about the kingdom of God, I think. So to me, it's just saying sinners are welcome back anytime.
Good point.
And it doesn't seem fair. I mean, I guess a modern philosophy that describing this would be that this philosophy of universal salvation, which I find extremely unfair. Ugh. But is that how God runs the kingdom? I don't know. We'll find out when we're there.
But it is told mostly from the standpoint of the older son, isn't it? We're told how he feels and how it seemed to him,
We don't have any feelings from the younger
and
son
no.
at all. We have feelings from the father. And
So I wonder if
older
we're
son.
kind of, our attention is kind of directed
Ah,
toward him and how he feels and
uh-huh.
how we might feel
Because-
that we did the right thing all along and
Yeah.
nobody cared.
And Jesus is still
And-
fawning all over that
Yeah.
sinner over
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
And I've
Oh,
been
back to the.
good.
Well, the laborers who worked all day and some who worked just
Right.
a little while.
It's not fair.
Same thing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the kingdom of God isn't necessarily fair
as
in
we,
our human,
as we perceive it.
right? as
And
we
as
perceive
the
it.
saying goes, the first shall be last and the last will be first, but my problem with that one, until I finally figured out, for those people who come to church forever and ever, every Sunday, and if I've wandered away, and then I come back, hopefully Jesus is gonna be happy about that, and even though these others, well, we've been here every Sunday, I mean, that's the way. But also on this, I think at this time, the first person, the first child, when the parents died, he was the one that was the head of the household and had to make sure that everybody was taken care of. The second son didn't have to do that. The first son was, and that's why we talk about first son. We don't talk about first daughters. They're just females, and they're just nothing but a female.
Right.
Well, let's go a little bit more into, because we've been talking about this, about using the word relationships. I mean, this is clearly about relationships. I remember years ago, now, how many of us in here have taken EFM? I know Paul and Christine have. And
I'm in it now.
at any rate, that was the most unique Bible study I've ever, it's beyond Bible study. I've called it seminary light. Thankfully, we don't have to learn foreign languages and there are no tests. So I'm assuming no one in here can speak Greek or Aramaic or Greek or Hebrew or any of that. So at any rate, years before Presbyterian Church, we had Bethel Bible study, which was good, but it wasn't of the same caliber of EFM, at least in my opinion. What I do remember particularly out of it though, and I don't have this picture. I think the guy who came up with it was from one of our more Nordic states, Wisconsin. And so he had this picture. It was supposed to be Adam, who looked, I thought, rather Nordic, not Middle Eastern. And the picture though had Adam with pretty good size, almost at least half or maybe 2/3 of his height, with a musical note that was broken and sticking in his side. And it was, in the way I remembered at least, it was demonstrating that he was out of harmony with himself, with God, and with others. And this story leaves us in an unresolved, are they going to get back in harmony or not between the three primary characters here, the father, the younger son, and the older son? Are they going to get back in harmony? And then it brings up the question, I keep going back to the book, is what circumstances or opportunities do we have in our own circumstances and situations where we're out of harmony, family members or otherwise, going back to my jingle about families are fun. The lady says, if you're waiting for an apology to try to make amends, don't wait.
You don't get to choose them.
Your family members.
Yeah.
You have to live with it.
I'd like to comment on this. I'm an only child, so I don't have any axe to grind at all. I do have two children, and I think my reaction would be identical to what the father's is. And it seems to me wouldn't be an uncommon reaction. And, but I can also see how the other son is jealous of it. And it's one thing that struck me is looking at, going back to the picture again, is this, the older son said, "You've treated me like a slave and given me nothing." But if the picture is an accurate description of what the Bible is trying to convey, the older son doesn't look like he's too bad off. You know, he's got fancy robes like his father, and certainly doesn't look as destitute as his brother. So I find that, you know, it seems to me the son is really, well, he's angry, of course, and you say all kinds of things when you're angry that you shouldn't. And but there's a certain amount of well, things you'd say when you're angry.
You know, that leads to something else that was in one of, I think it was in the other book. And this whole comparison, contrast between gratitude and entitlement. And I realized, what's that thing about too soon old and too late smart? That there were at least two folks I had long-term relationships in the CPA firm I had. And in retrospect, I realized that both had a big sense of entitlement. And regardless of what was done, it was never enough. And what I wanted to do, not perfectly, I'm sure, but wanted to do over the years was to live into a sense of gratitude, that everything is a gift from God, as opposed to my having, you know, earned something and looking at someone else and say, well, gosh, I'd really like to have that. I don't have this, I'd like to have that. And I realized, as I observed their behavior, particularly those two people in retrospect over the years, that I didn't think there was anything that would make us much more miserable any faster was to have a big sense of entitlement. And so I wonder, Claude's point, the older brother doesn't look like he's making out all that badly in the picture. And yet, for whatever reason, it wasn't enough, and he wasn't accepting what was coming to him from a sense of gratitude and humility. So how does that play out in your own observations or lives?
My couple of thoughts take on this. First of all, Rembrandt's painting is excellent because the father is the dominant figure, and with the arms completely engrossing the son. And obviously the older son is back in the shadows. So I think Rembrandt is telling us something there. That I've also come to see also just some of the dynamic that Luke has packed into this. Only Luke has the story here of the, I prefer to call it the compassionate father, because I think that is really what Yeshua was trying to communicate to the Pharisees in the context when he sets up, hey, a sheep is lost. That happens quite a bit. That's not a big deal. I leave one and go get the other, and we rejoice. I lose a coin on my floor where there's cracks, and that's fairly normal, and I find it, and yay. Well, then Luke inserts this powerful drama, highly insightful about the human condition, it seems to me. And maybe it's because Luke is a physician, not that he has created this story. I happen to believe that Yeshua was a very sensitive rabbi who read his audience, and he was very sensitive to the dynamics of the time of that first century situation. And he is telling this story it is so laden with many layers of insights. One, the amount of freedom that the compassionate father gives the teenager or very young who wants to go sow his oats. And it would have been the father's right to say it's premature for you to get 1/3. Generally, the two sons would each get half, and then the father retains the remaining third until his death, and then that is divided among the other sons upon the death. But a couple of the insights looking at this, first, when the son, he imagines, I'm going to confess this, I'm going to be contrite. And the story starts, and who's the first actor when the son, the prodigal son comes in sight? The father, which is very uncharacteristic for a father or Jewish father to run. The whole idea of a father running was sort of against the image of the father who is the patriarch of the family and the status. But Yeshua has the father running towards and welcoming the contrite son. The other insight, and maybe Christine, you seem to identify with the older son, and maybe there's some insight there, I don't know. But as I read it, first of all, when the act 2 or 3 happens, when the older father says, whoa, you've thrown this robe around this son, and he's stinky, and you said you're gonna get the fatted calf, not any old lean calf, but we're gonna slaughter the fatted calf for this so-called retrograde, and everything he did. But the older son, very uncharacteristically, according to our text, he is saying, I want to capture the verse because it's so interesting. The older father, the way he addresses his son. In verse 29, the older son says, look. And you can just imagine the father went, whoop. You don't address the patriarch of the family like that, but it's a genuine feeling legitimately that this older son felt, because he's seeing the fatted calf and the robe, and you're welcoming back this guy who's all stinky for having living it up with prostitutes. But the dynamic, and I think it was a part Luke, but I also think it was really Yeshua who is very insightful to the human condition. So my takeaway is the compassionate father that allowed the freedom for the son to go off and to sow his oats. And then secondly, the compassionate father didn't sit back, well, I'm sitting, I know he's going to come back, and boy, I'm going to say, I told you so. He rushes out to welcome, and he opens, get the fatted calf. And then the way, even after the older son says, look, and he's really trying to put it to his father, and yet the compassionate father just says, you have your inheritance too. You're still a part of the family. Anyway, I don't know whether that's helpful, but I find it
He says,
very.
all that I have is yours. To me, he was as compassionate to the older one as to the younger one.
Exactly.
That
Especially given.
him and says, all that I have is yours. And that's
Yep.
what makes you realize that the older person gets everything. No, I felt when he saw the young man coming, because when the young man left, the father figured, oh, glory, I'll never see him again. And to me, that would be so exciting. You have to look out, and here he comes. To me, this father is fantastic. because he loves them both.
Yeah,
he is
and I think that's why Yeshua told the story. It is a parable of God the Father that Yeshua experienced in his, through the temptation, experience himself. I think he was feeling deeply the relationship with his Father.
Well, I guess I should bring this to a close, Mike.
We've got a little bit of
Well-
time, coming to a close, but many of you or several of you have talked about which person you identify with. And I don't know that I identify with any of the three major characters, but my thought, and it's John, it's somewhat in line with what you were just saying, but is that did the younger child take, his portion before? Did the father give the portion to the older son? All that I have is yours. And all I'm thinking is, all of this belongs to the father. None of it belongs to either one of the sons. And that man's free to do whatever he wants with it.
Yeah.
And at the end of his time, whatever's left, he can then say, here you go, share it between you. But, it's a trope that's been used in television and movies for years, where a child will, in some context, will say to the parents, well, we're rich. And the parents' response is, your mother and I are rich. You have nothing. So I don't know that anybody has taken anything yet. It's the Father's. It's all his.
Exactly.
Well, going back to the question I raised a few minutes ago, in terms of our call to action to bring reconciliation, which leads to celebration, where does that sort of leave us with that part of it?
My very favorite scripture in all of the Bible.
Okay, what
It's-
just happened?
What?
here?
I'm sorry, I was fiddling, trying to get back to a place I was, and I've messed up. Excuse me.
Did you do that, Susan?
Yeah, who knew that was possible? I'm
I don't
sorry.
know.
That was possible.
Okay, I'll sit still. Go ahead.
My very favorite piece of scripture is the Father ran. That speaks the entire relationship to me. And so I think as we participate in God's world, as we are part of God's community, when we know people's hearts are turning, it's such a joyful time. Celebratory, indeed.
Well, does that mean we're supposed to run too in the appropriate circumstances to run for reconciliation?
I think so.
Yes.
I think we got to think about this too in terms of the other stories of Jesus's activities. And of course, he was, and some of the parables start out with reference to him eating with the tax collectors and not the tax accountants, by the way, but and the prostitutes and everything else. And that's a story of compassion as well, where Jesus is treating those people at least as well as he treats the so-called, nice people. So
Right.
we're running out of time, so just occurred to me, and just something to think about, I guess, is this story starts to remind me of Shakespeare's tragedies, particularly King Lear, where the fault is with the father, and it leads to disastrous results. So it's just a different perspective on what a father is supposed to do and not do.
Yeah, exactly. Would have been so normal for the father to say, I told you so, and be ready to lecture him, the younger son. But
Mhm.
Well, to me, the younger son went and did all these sinful things, but he was still welcomed back, and I'm not gonna tell you about my life, but I've done a number of things that if he accepts me, wow. You know, that getting to come back home or getting to come back to him
And having him
hold me,
rejoice,
and
yes.
to hold me and forgive me, and you know, it just blows my mind. To quote, be forgiven and loved,
Mhm.
you know, not just forgiven, but to be loved with running to me and holding me,
Mhm.
you know.
I'm my beloved and he is mine. His banner over me is love.
Did we answer your question that you just posed?
Of a fashion, I think.
Okay.
Well, should
What do
we,
you see as the call to action?
well, I think it's, it made me think about different relationships
Mhm.
where I've put relationships on the back burner. But, okay, well, for various reasons that can be seen to be justifiable,
Mhm.
and yet, you know, the issue is, and yet.
Yeah, do we forgive and love as much as we want to be forgiven and loved?
Right.
You know.
Well, Michael, do you usually close in prayer, or how do you?
We close however we wish. Brenda sang for us last week. Lewis Hunt played his guitar for us a few weeks ago. I don't know, is anybody into interpretive dance?
Yeah. Well, maybe as a closing, one last comment about the painting, and again, I got that out of this particular book, is that, and Henry Nouwen's way of thinking, the painting and the father, the younger son, and the older son represent Rembrandt in different stages of his life. And I didn't know all that much about him, but he had suffered a lot of tragedy. I think maybe 4 or 5 of his children had died before he did, and his wife had died, and he'd gone from, it sounds like a very, it shows some other paintings in the book of a rather self-centered, rambunctious youth to, and now picturing himself as the fashion of the father. And Henry Nouwen says in his book that they were all ultimately called to have those kinds of attributes that the father has.
Jack, if it's all right, I thought of a prayer that we just used this week in our staff meeting to end our devotional. This comes from the book Gorillas of Grace by Ted Loder. In this moment, draw me to yourself, Lord, and make me aware not so much of what I've given as of all I have received and have yet to share. Send me forth in power and gladness, and with great courage to live out in the world what I pray and profess, that in sharing I may do justice, make peace, grow in love, enjoy myself, other people, and your world now and you forever. Amen.
Amen. Very nice.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Nice job.
Thank you. I enjoyed being with you folks tonight.
And
Great
please
to see
remember,
you.
we do not meet next week. It'll be the night before Thanksgiving, so this class will not meet. The following week, we will meet, and our presenter will be Mary Ellen Wofford, who's a member of All Saints Parish, but a member of the EFM cohort led by Joe and Laura O'Shields. So we will regather 2 weeks from tonight on December, whatever.
Happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Yeah.
You as well.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Gobble, gobble. Yes.
Thanks, Jack. It was
Thank
great.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank